Okay, so before we go to the 30th of December, let's quickly backtrack. There's just two things that I want to get back to. And it's that this lady that I told you about whose stitches came loose, she was lying across from me and she kept talking to the girl next to me, asking her, wow, how are you dealing with your pain like that? But the girl that's lying next to you is crying so much, and wow, you're such a strong person. And oh, I could just commend you for the way you're dealing with your pain. And yeah, the next morning they came and they took her back to theatre, and her stitches had to be redone because she obviously thought that you get a certificate or something when you join the circus right after having a cesarean. So obviously, never compare yourself with other people. Your experience is your experience. Your pain is your pain. And having gone through something as intense as giving birth, especially through C-section, you are entitled to having your experience the way that you are experiencing it. I don't see anyone. It's just, I don't know, it was ludicrous to me that she thought that I had to in some way conduct myself. If you're respectful towards the nurses and you're respectful towards others, I feel that you could express yourself in any way that you feel your pain. So that was just something that I wanted to get off my chest, ladies. Never be in competition with anyone, not even with yourself. You could obviously push yourself in life, but when you go through something intense, be kind to yourself. Be graceful and gracious. And the second thing is, it was just weird to me that whilst in labor they would give me pethidine, but then in the aftermath of having a C-section they give you Panado. Literally Panado for the win, ladies. So it was just pain. The next morning, mobilizing is just, it is dreadful. I don't even know what to say about it. So I used the mobile crib thingy that Dawid was in to move around. That really helped me. It was like a walker. So that helped me initially to start moving around. And so they move us to another room. And then 2 hours after that, they move us to another room. And here's something that I want to say. I want to say thank you so much to all the immensely talented and fantastic doctors, specialists at Steve Biko. You really, really, really are the top of the crop. You are amazing, and thank you so much for helping my son and I. However, at this point, I would like to say that Steve Biko, the hospital, I think there's a big problem. I don't want to go as far as to say it's falling apart, but huge issues. For instance, many of the lifts are not working. This is not something that I'm saying. It was reported in the Pretoria News as well in November 2020 of many of the lifts not working. That's true. Of the how many theaters, I think 11, 4 are working, or 4 of the theaters are operational. And something that I personally experienced, which was just next level, was that the 2 rooms they moved us into, the air conditioning wasn't working, but also there's no actual ventilation, like with fresh air coming in, like windows, etc. There are 2 small windows that were open like this, and 4 people in the room, and then this air conditioning is blowing hot air into the room. And when I say hot, I mean hot like a heater hot, like 27 degrees Celsius, hot air. So at this point, Dawid is just blood red. I call my aunt, she's a podiatrist, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do? His fontanelle is looking weird, like it's going in. I am sweating profusely. Like at this point, I realize we are dehydrating. Definitely. So my aunt says, please ask them if they can move you to a different room. And to which the nurses are rude, and then they say that, no, I have to wait for the doctor, which will be coming tomorrow morning, and that's in more than 18 hours. So my aunt just said, okay, do you have a towel? Just wet the towel and keep Dawid as nourished as possible, breastfeed as often as possible, and keep the wet towel on him. So I'm doing this, and things are just, at this point, not feeling great. And I'm just keeping as positive as possible and keeping him as hydrated as possible. So this situation is really starting to worry me, because I can see his fontanelle looking like it's going in, and he is blood red. I took photos of this, and I was really worried about him. And the nurses were just like, you have to speak to doctor tomorrow morning. And that's that. The only thing that they kept asking me was, why do you keep taking your baby to the bathroom with you? And I was like, it's because he doesn't have tags. Nobody's identified him. He, in all the time that we were in the hospital, never received tags until the last day, which I'll elaborate on right now. So in literally the human trafficking capital of the world, they never ever identified him. Every other person in my room, their babies, had tags around their legs with their mother's surname on. But Dawid just never had any form of identification on him. And so the nurses never really worried about this 27 degrees blasting into the room with no ventilation, but they did worry about the fact that I took Dawid with me to the bathroom. So I was like, I'm not going to leave my child with strangers in a room when he has literally no form of identification on him. So that evening, the 30th, I'm still not sleeping, and partially because of pain, and partially because he has no form of identification, and nobody is actually acting on rectifying the situation. So I'm like, I'm not gonna sleep. And at this point, I am really starting to become agitated by this immense heat, my baby being absolutely listless. He is literally dehydrating and blood red. No identification. I'm tired. I can't sleep. I'm in pain. He's agitated. And then this nurse comes to me at the witching hour of 3. And she's like, blah, 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 blah. Your baby's birth hasn't been written down in the birth registry. And she's like, where's your baby's green book, Journey to Health or whatever? I'm like, I don't know. You guys are supposed to give it to me when you inoculate him or vaccinate him. She's like, no, but where is it? I'm like, I literally have not gotten it yet. And she's like, okay. And just, they start realizing he was never registered at birth. His Abhar score was never written down. It was never written down how much he weighed, although I did hear them saying he weighed 1.61. They never wrote down his length. There was just no record in that entire hospital of my son having been born. And I lose it. At this point, with us dehydrating, plus all of this, I lose it. But I don't lose it to this specific nurse. I'm like, okay, cool. But obviously, I know she wasn't present for all that. She's just the bearer of this news. And I keep it till the next morning, and the doctor comes and he goes through everything, and I'm fine. You know, I'm like, doctor, I've passed stool, etc. You've said that my son is healthy enough to be released, so he's already been released. However, am I being released today with him? And he's like, no, we still want to check your blood sugar. And I'm like, no, doctor, my blood sugar is 100%. I haven't been on metformin since giving birth, and I've had normal blood sugar for the last 2 days. However, we are literally dehydrating in this room. My son has no form of identification, and it just seems that things are not the way it should be, because my son hasn't been registered as having been born, has no identification, anything. So the doctor's like, well, you could sign yourself out, but if you do that, then we just have no liability. And I'm like, well, I went through my file, and no disrespect, doctor, but I am just literally in the best interest of my son, I am going to sign myself out. Because when I asked the doctor, could we then please be moved to another room, he's like, all the rooms are like this, all the rooms are this hot. So I'm like, doctor, just with all respect, I understand it's protocol to keep me here probably for another day, but I did go through my file, and my blood pressure, etc. is normal, and you also say it's normal, so I'm just going to sign myself up, because my son is literally going to dehydrate here. And so with really no hard feelings, I signed myself out of Steve Biko. Thank God, Chris called. I don't even know who he called, but they rectified everything within 3 hours of that, and Dawid and I left the hospital with him having identification, etc. But I hated that it had to come to that. Yeah, so that is not how I wanted our time at Steve Biko to end. But it is what it is, and I just tried to stay as respectful and friendly as possible to the doctors and the nurses that took care of us. But yes, it is what it is. And a few hours later, Chris came to fetch us. So he was probably there 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the 31st of December 2020. And that was also such a weird experience. One of the most beautiful experiences, but it was just so surreal, because he hadn't been for one scan. He hadn't been there when Dawid was born, not even virtually, because obviously my phone was taken. I went to theater. So it was just so weird. When we walked out, there was a security guard that came in, and she was like, let me help you with your bags. And I felt bad. I was like, let me help you. She's like, no, obviously you had a Caesar, you can't. So she was like, no, don't worry. Like, I do this for a living. I help everyone here in the labor ward. And so she took my bags out, and I was just carrying Dawid, and I saw Chris, and he brought up a wheelchair, and I felt very emotional, but I couldn't cry. And I just gave him his son. Like, before anything, before hugs, kisses, whatever, I just gave Dawid to him. And he looked at him, and I could see that it was an emotional moment. And I don't know, it's just so weird. 2020 was just such a year that even though you felt the deepest, I don't know, tears just evaded us. But that was a special and deep moment. And saw his son. He was like, okay, well, let's get out of this COVID hotspot. And then the security guard was like, yeah, remember to close the baby up with a blanket so that he doesn't inhale too much of this COVID air. So, yeah, and we scrammed. So we finished off 2020 in our own home with baby boy in his house. There he is. I just heard him. I gotta go. Wait, can his daddy bring him to me, please? Please bring him to me. So he started 2021 in his home with both his parents. There's the baby. He's probably hungry. And on that note, I just want to say I hope we all have an amazing 2021. May God let his spirit rain down on us so that we know what true love is, so that we know what everything is that we need, and may God be good to us this year so that we really just, there he is. So we really just have a great 2021.
Lights a bit.
Yeah, the lights a bit hectic for him, but that's the boy. And now I gotta go, guys. Thank you for joining us on BabyBumpVlog, and I hope truly that 2021 will be filled with God's protection, grace, and mercy. Mwah.